So help me to welcome our speaker. Today we have Dave Vance. Dave is the president of Managed Learning, and we are so delighted to have him with us today. Dave, this session is all yours.
Well, thanks, Casey. It's a pleasure to be with you and a chance to talk about what I hope is a provocative topic. And I'll be interested in getting your feedback and seeing what you think about your own organization, both before and after the webinar. So with that, let's take a poll, Casey. Are we ready to do that? Yes, there it is. So, do you think some of your organization's learning is strategically aligned? I know I haven't defined that for you yet. We will. But just based on what you know, do you think it's strategically aligned to the top goals of your organization? What do you think? Definitely yes, definitely no, not really sure. All right. Got about an even split between yes and no, but a small sample size there. All right, so keep those results in mind. We'll see if it changes. I'll ask this again at the end of the webinar, and we'll see if the results change a little bit, depending on how you read strategically aligned. All right. When I ask a lot of people about this, many say, oh, they definitely are. And when I ask why, they might say, well, because for one thing, we tag all of our courses. We tag them to one of our goals. And so I can pull up a list at least every year and show that we had 20 courses that could be used to support our number one goal and 15 that are used to support our number two goal. And so that's a way to think about it. Others are getting into the role-based approach and say we've taken some time to identify the learning to support skills we need for, if not every role, at least the important roles in your organization. And since employees are the ones in those roles responsible for achieving the goals, doesn't that mean that we are strategically aligned? Because again, we've got courses that are aligned to those goals. Diving a little bit deeper, since there is a focus today on becoming a roles-based or skill-based organization, and some of you are probably further along than others, but it takes a lot of work actually to do this, as I'm sure some of you can attest. Back in the day when I was at Caterpillar, competency modeling was the in fashion way to go. And so a lot of organizations were developing their competency models. Skills models are similar to that, maybe a little narrower in definition than competency, but the same idea that for every role in the organization or every person, you would want to identify what skills they need, what proficiency level for those skills. You could identify then any gaps in skills between what they have and what's needed. And if we have that list of skills by role or position, then it's becoming easier with the help of AI and a lot of software to then link our learning to those roles and come up with learning journeys for people, or at least a map of the skills to the courses we have in our LMS. And I think that's all part of a role or skill-based learning. I know that can take a bit of an effort to do across your entire organization, especially if you're a big organization. But some are working very hard to move in that direction, to become a true skills or role-based organization, taking the time to do those sorts of things. So again, that poses the question that if you're doing this for all departments, and that's going to include departments that are responsible for the goals like increasing sales or increasing productivity or increasing quality, then aren't you doing strategic learning? I would say you are not. You are doing it in a way you're conscious of whether courses seem to line up, seem to map towards the goals. And that's a start. but it's not truly strategic learning. So you ask next, well, why isn't it? What's missing? I've got the mapping. So what else is there? What else would I need to do? Here are some elements that are missing. You're not in that approach focusing on delivering business results in the particular fiscal year. Business results being like 2% higher sales due just to learning within the time frame of the current fiscal year. Remember, senior leaders always think in terms of your fiscal year, which may or may not be your calendar year, but the fiscal year. That's for record keeping. That's how you announce your results. It also is missing, perhaps, the goal focused discussion with a goal owner. A goal owner will be that person designated by the CEO to be responsible for delivering a goal, like the head of sales would be the one responsible for an 8% increase in sales for the company. Head of manufacturing might be responsible for reducing injuries in the factory, and so on. So goal owner, high level, usually direct report to the CEO. What's often missing in the role-based approach is that proactive, upfront, goal-focused discussion with the goal owner, asking them what's going to be required to achieve their goal for this particular fiscal year. So you're having a discussion before the year starts and asking about learning, especially if it's a new goal or if it's a new goal owner, someone you haven't worked with before. And doing kind of a high level needs analysis, you'll be determining whether it appears that learning would have a role to play. You can confirm that later with a traditional needs analysis, but at least up front, does it seem like, given the problems they're facing, that learning might be able to make a contribution? And if so, then you and the supervisors and their team can get together and begin thinking about what those learning programs might look like. And we're going to want them deployed early in the fiscal year, so Q1 or Q2 for any strategic learning. Figure out what kind of learning is best for them, who the target audience is by name, when they have to complete it, probably mandatory. And then for this type of learning, resulting from this discussion you're having with the head of sales, for example, what is the communication plan? And does the head of sales need help in communicating why they want to do this plan for their employees? And you can offer to help. They're certainly going to need a reinforcement plan. They probably won't know how to do that. But you, as a learning professional, can help them with that. And you can draft a reinforcement plan for the supervisors to use in that organization to work with their employees after they take the training. Sometimes it's complex enough that a more formal change management plan may be needed. Again, they may not know how to do that, but you do, and you could help devise a change management plan for them. So those are two elements that are missing in a typical role-based approach. Another important element, though, is accountability. Because what we're talking about a minute ago and talking with the goal owner is going to make us jointly accountable for planning and then delivering the program. May consist of one course, multiple courses, might span different types of learning, but we're both going to be doing that. And we're both going to be responsible for that. After all, we're the experts in learning, so they wouldn't know what we know about how to develop or deliver or reinforce good learning. But we're doing it for their employees for whom we have no direct control. So especially if it's mandatory learning, we can't make their employees take it. Only they can do it. We can't make them apply it. Only they can. So this is going to be that joint partnership. So you're going to have specific measurable targets or plans set for all the key efficiency, effectiveness, and an outcome measure probably. And we're going to work with the goal owner up front to come up with some reasonable plans to do that. And then once we have a plan, then we're going to execute it with discipline, just like people in sales do, just like people in manufacturing do. So that means you're going to look at it at least on a monthly basis, if not a weekly basis. And you're going to need some help in doing that. You're going to need special management style reports, not your traditional scorecards or dashboards, but management style reports, just the same as your colleagues in sales use, to answer two questions at least every month. Are we on plan year to date? We put a lot of time into making this plan. We've shared our commitment with the CEO. So are we on plan? It's March, it's April. Are we on plan year to date? And are we going to make plan by the end of the year? Often things take a little longer to get going than you think. Maybe you had to hire some people or get a consultant to help or get the money budgeted and allocated. So it may take a little longer to get some of these programs up and going, but often you can make it up. And so you might say, we're behind plan year to date, true enough. But now that we have our funding, now that we have our consultant, we purchased whatever we need for this, I think we can make up the lost time and still deliver by the end of the year, deliver all the promised results by the end of the year. So that forecast is really important. Because if it turns out different, if you look at it and say, I don't see any way, given where we are today, that we're going to actually deliver what we promised, then you've got to step back and think about what could you do? What would you have to reprioritize? Is certain help needed? Maybe the CLO needs to get involved. Maybe the CEO needs to get involved. Where are the roadblocks? Why aren't we on plan year to date? What has to happen? Do we have a chance if we do something to get back on plan? Bottom line here, both parties were laser focused at the start of the year on putting a good plan together. And now, as the year progresses, on delivering the plan results. And it's up to both parties. It's not a learning department thing. It's not just a sales department thing. It's up to both parties. Neither of our jobs is done until we see the results. Our job isn't done when they take the training. Their job isn't done when they call us in to help. Neither of our jobs is done until the program's over and it's having the intended results, the planned results. All these are elements of goal-based or strategic learning. So you're beginning to get a sense for what I'm thinking of when I talk about goal-based or strategic learning. You may have had the same ideas in mind for this, or this may be something a little different than you thought about before. Well, with this in mind, I would conclude that skills or role-based learning is not the same as strategic or goal-based learning. So no matter how good you are today, or you're going to be in the future at skills or role-based learning, even when you get roles developed for every persona or every user, for every employee, and even when you get learning that's linked to those roles, and even when you establish a proficiency level for each of those roles and can measure where someone is today, and you find where the gaps are, even when you do all that, which is not easy and very time consuming, even when you do all that, it's not going to be the same as strategic or goal-based learning. Just as a certificate of skill completion is not the same as skill demonstration. So one objection to the role-based approach might be, well, Dave, you're just talking about getting skills. If you're thinking of the Kirkpatrick Phillips levels, maybe you're taking a test and showing you're proficient at level 2, but that's not the same as using it on the job when you get back, so level 3. Although I see lately, even in the last 6 months, and with the help of AI, more vendors are addressing that issue and trying to provide ways for people to practice it after the course. So get some of that application, maybe in between actually when they're using it for real on the job and after they've taken the course, to get some practice in there so they will be able to demonstrate the skill. But still, at scale, skill demonstration is much harder than skill transfer. Even if you can demonstrate the skills and record that somehow in your system, that's not the same thing as business results. You've developed it such that it should be, because that was part of the way you laid it out. But things can happen. Maybe a person's supervisor is not supportive. Maybe they don't have the tools, the resources to actually apply what they learned. Maybe there's some other issue which is stopping the skills they have now learned from translating into actual business results. Also, when you think about role-based learning, no matter how well you do it, and maybe some of you'll have some ideas on how to counter this one. I think in most organizations it lacks CEO visibility, or maybe I should say CLO impression or CEO credit. I mean, you might be able to show, if you've been tracking your progress in this, that you raise the competency level, the skill level in your organization by role, by department, by region, from maybe an average of 3.1 to 3.7, which is a big deal. But will that impress the CEO? Will they say, oh, wow, that is definitely worth the $10 million we're spending on learning and development? Let me go share that with my colleagues in my next CEO meeting. No, I don't think they will. I think they would say, I mean, that sounds good. I'm glad we're closing the gap, but I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means for my goals. Remember, CEOs are going to have 4, 5, 6 goals. When I was at Caterpillar, our CEO always had 7 goals. And they were ranked in priority from 1 through 7. For a company like Caterpillar, a for-profit company, sales was always the #1 goal. So our CEO, being a very practical sort, would always want to know exactly what is that learning doing to help me accomplish my goals. After all, he's being evaluated or she's being evaluated by your board of directors. And like all of us, they want to perform, they want to do well. So how is learning helping them? If your bottom line is we've increased the overall competency rate for most of our roles by 10% or 15% or 20%, that doesn't translate directly into anything they can use or understand. I mean, it's good. They'll appreciate employees are getting more training, but it isn't the same as if you could say, as a result of this training, sales increased 2%. They know immediately what that's worth. So role-based training often lacks that kind of visibility. And I saw this, I believe this was what was going on, working with a client about a year ago. And the client we were working with is a large company. And they'd hired us to come in and do some education for them. It was part of an 8-week program to talk about strategic learning, goal-based learning, how they might begin to do it or do it better. And so we're real excited about that. We were about 20 people participating in this training. And we were 2 sessions in. And then I read an article in the Wall Street Journal. It was earnings season, and the company just released results, and they were terrible. I mean, not just terrible, but way below analyst expectations. So the stock price fell precipitously. Now, if you've been in the business world for any time at all, you know what's coming after that. Cost cutting, reduction in force. I mean, they were so far off on their earnings that it was going to take some massive cost reduction. And sure enough, I got an email 2 days later saying that there have been some changes that you need to be aware of, Dave. Of those 20 people you were working with, 15 have now been let go. The head of training has been reassigned out of the training department. Now, obviously, no public explanation was given for what was going on. This group had spent almost 18 months. They were well down the road of doing all those things we talked about that a good role-based organization would do. They were working their way through and making great progress in identifying the roles, the skills needed for each role, and linking them up in their system so they'd be easily accessible by anyone. Really a textbook application of the role-based model. And yet 15, and by the way, there were 15 of the 20 that were dedicated to the role-based initiative. They were all gone. 100% of them were gone overnight. And that was the end of that organization's role-based approach. So I am guessing that when cuts had to be made, someone looked and said, we've spent 18 months, millions of dollars on this so far, and I'm sure they're making progress, but it's not appearing in the results of our company. I just don't see what difference it's going to make. And if it makes a difference, it may not come for years. We can't keep funding this. I've got to cut someplace. I'm not going to cut sales. I'm not going to cut design. I'm not going to cut quality. I'm going to cut training. The results are just too indirect. So that was a real wake-up call. And if there is ever another recession, or if your organization comes under financial pressure or scrutiny, the same sort of thing could happen. So let's dive in a little bit deeper on this. Let me give you a better idea of what this other thing is I'm talking about. So let me then really define what I mean by strategic or goal-based learning. And that'll give you a better idea of whether you're doing something like this today and whether there's an opportunity for you to start doing it or maybe doing more of it than you are today. On the other hand, if there's some of you that after listening to this say, yep, Dave, we're doing all those things, then I'd love for you to tell us in chat what kind of results it's had or any issues that you ran into in trying to achieve that. So again, strategic goal-based learning, really a special category of learning. For most organizations, this won't be most of what you do. This will be a small portion of what you do. We're all different in our organizations. We all have different charters, what we're expected to do for our companies. I would say typically on average, this strategic learning might make up 20% of the learning that you do. Might take a little bit more of that in terms of resources because it's more complex. But in most cases, the minority of what you do. You have a lot of other learning you're responsible for. Compliance training, basic skills training, reskilling, upskilling, leadership development, onboarding. You got a lot of other learning to do. It's all important, all has to be done, and you're probably the one doing it all. So this is one of those many categories. I just think it's a very special category. It's highly visible to your CEO, and thus to the amount of resources you're going to keep getting in a learning department. And as I indicated a few minutes ago, what we're advocating here is for a very proactive partnering process, starting with the CEO. So at Caterpillar, we were on a calendar year fiscal year, and I met with my CEO in August of each year, like T-minus 5 months before the next fiscal year begins. And by then, the CEO would have an idea of what are the goals for next year. Well, they might be tweaked, and maybe they haven't decided yet whether they want sales to be up 10% or 7%, but they want sales to keep growing. So I can get an idea early on what the goals are going to be and who the goal owners are going to be and what the priority of those goals is, because they're never all equal. And then in September, I went and met with the goal owners, especially the new ones I hadn't worked with before. And we're going to find out from those goal owners kind of what they've been doing. Now, maybe we've been helping them in the past. So this is just a check-in visit. Maybe we'll begin thinking about what's going to be different for the coming year. But often if it's a new goal or a new goal owner, you're basically starting over and have to figure out at that high level whether learning would have a role to play. We know it doesn't always have a role, but often it will. So in this case, for this coming fiscal year, should we pursue it further? Should we get our team and your team together and dive into this in more detail? Does that seem to make sense? And often it will. Of those 7 goals Caterpillar had every year, there wasn't a single year when I was CLO that learning could not do something to support each of those 7 goals. So then we're going to meet with the goal owners, determine if learning has that role to play, and if it does, work with their staff to figure out what that learning program would look like. And often when you're talking about top level goals, this isn't like a 60-minute course. Those aren't going to be enough to move the needle on something complex. It's going to be multiple courses. So maybe you start out with some pre-learning that is sent to them in advance. Maybe they download it. Maybe it's asynchronous. Maybe you bring them together then for a couple of courses for ILT or VILT. Then there's performance support tools afterwards. So more goes into it. So figure out what that learning program is going to look like and exactly who's the target audience. And it shouldn't be everybody. So let's be specific about it because we're talking about a lot of learning, a lot of hours involved here. So who should we start with on this? When do we want it completed? If it's this kind of strategic, important learning, it needs to be done in the first half of the year. So the sooner you get this learning done, the more months are left in the current fiscal year for it to have impact. And it's all about how much of a result can I have in this fiscal year? So the clock's running. It's a 12-month clock and it's running. So you want to get it out there as soon as you can. So you're going to reach agreement with the goal owner on the program and the target audience and the completion date. But you also want to reach agreement with the goal owner on the planned impact. So if it's sales, how much of an impact could this program for this target audience, if we get it out early, if it's well communicated, well developed, well delivered, well reinforced, how much of an impact could that have? Could it get us 1/4 of the way to that 8% increase in sales? So what impact could it have if we both do our jobs? And we're going to have to come up with specific targets then for how many need to go through it and completion dates and all those sorts of things. We're also going to need to agree on roles and responsibilities. And I'll show you in a minute what that looks like because that's a big deal here. This is a partnership and we have different roles and responsibilities. Bottom line, we're going to jointly manage this program to achieve the planned impact that came from both of us. Here's an example, just in case you're wondering, of what a carefully planned program would look like. It's a business-centric type of report here, because at the top it has the goal owner, Chen. Chen's goal, given by the CEO or the board of directors, is to reduce company-wide injuries by 25%. We have talked to Chen. We believe that injuries are occurring because employees don't know how to be safe. Therefore, training should make a major contribution. In fact, a 60% contribution is the plan. We think it's reasonable. No guarantee we'll do it, but 60%, so big contribution. 60% times 25% is a 15% reduction in injuries due just to learning. That's the plan. All we know for sure about any plan is it will be wrong. That's okay. It's going to be a stake in the ground. And we'll learn as we do this for over a couple of years period. You'll get much better at making plans. Now, what do we have to do to deliver this level 4 15% reduction in injuries? Well, we got to get 2 courses done early in the year by January 31st. We're going to put 3,000 people through them, much more than we put in previous years. Each taking 2 courses, that's 6,000 total participants. If the course is developed by the end of January, I want it delivered, completed by mid-February, mid-April. Got a cost budget of $70,000 to hit. Naturally, I want a good participant reaction. There's some learning involved. I want them to score well on that. Most important is the application. This has to be applied. People aren't going to stop hurting themselves at work unless they apply what we've taught them. So if we're going to reduce those injuries, keep our employees safe, they've got to apply what we're teaching. If we get that 60% contribution, resulting in a 15% reduction in injuries, and if we can hit that cost target, then we ought to be able to deliver an ROI of about 50%. So the head of manufacturing really cares about that 15% reduction in injuries. And they and the CFO and CEO care about that 15% reduction along with that 50% ROI. So that's an example of a carefully planned program. Maybe you're already doing something like that, but if you're not, just be thinking, is there a program, high level, high visibility program that you might put this kind of effort into? You can't do this for everything. The Caterpillar, we did this for about 10 programs. And at Caterpillar, the company was about a $50 billion company at the time, um, with I don't know, 80,000 employees. So we did 10 of these for what was really important. And then use that same setup then to manage the results. This just gives you an example of what a management report looks like. You got a column for plan, compare your results to plan. That answers the question, are we on plan year to date? And then the forecast and forecast compared to plan to answer that second question of, are we going to make plan by the end of the year? So that's what you need to manage this with discipline. I want to know every month for these key programs, how are we doing? Is there a problem? If there is a problem, is it going to fix itself? Or do we need to intervene? Do we need to do more than we had planned on doing? If there's a bottleneck, can I help remove it? If we find out we under budgeted, then it's on me as CLO to find some more money for this. So we would meet with my leadership team on the second Tuesday of every month, dedicated to going over these 10 management reports for the 10 key programs in support of those 7 goals. Just give you an idea of what I mean by disciplined execution. So again, you can't do this for everything. But if you have a chance to support some of your CEOs or the head of HR's top goals, then there should be an approach something like this. And what you're doing would be an example of strategic or goal-based learning.
Hey, Dave, do you mind if
Yeah,
I jump in with a question?
sure.
And it's kind of playing off of what you were just talking about, but perhaps you can reiterate a little bit too. Omar asks, what can we do in practice to measure strategic or goal-based learning?
Uh, I'm not quite sure maybe what Omar means by that. If you're talking about how you actually measure the results, let me back up a minute here. So we're using this to manage our way through the year. If the question is, at the end of the program or the end of the year, how do I determine what the level 4 impact of learning was or anything else? Then I'm using the tools I have at my disposal. So I've got the Kirkpatrick-Phillips approach. I've got the post-event survey where I get my level 1 participant reaction. And I would also add one question on intent to apply to the post-event survey. And that's going to give me my intent to apply right at the end of the course. Do you think you'll be able to apply this? That's a leading indicator of actual application. If you can afford to do it, then follow up 2 to 3 months later with a follow-up survey and ask about actual application. If you don't have those resources, then just use the intent to apply. For level 4, what was the actual outcome to compare to my plan of a 15% reduction due just to training? How do I find out what that actually was? The Phillips have a methodology. Jack Phillips wrote a book in 1982, The Handbook of Evaluation and Measurement. He lays out 6 different methods for isolating the impact of learning. The most commonly used one is called the participant estimation methodology. Doesn't rely on any statistics. And you're asking the participants for their subjective opinion on how much impact they believe the training they took has made on their results, like sales. And then because it is subjective and a bit of a guess, to ask them for their confidence level in that. And you multiply the confidence level times the result they gave you to get something called a confidence adjusted isolated impact. And you average all those together. And that'll give you this 60% contribution. So the plan was 60%. Maybe the actual number turns out to be 55%. Maybe it turns out to be 63%. That's what I then used to figure out what the actual isolated impact of learning was. Some people use a control group. If you have a naturally occurring control group, that is the best way to isolate the impact of learning. But there are four other methods that you can read about in one of the books I've written, or the Phillips have many books on this to learn more about that. So there you have it, getting to all the five levels. So it is doable. But just like I'm saying with this, it does take time and energy, and you wouldn't aspire to go that far for every single course or program you do. But there should be a few, I hope, that each of you have a chance to deliver that are this important, that it would make sense to go this far, to set it up, to plan it carefully, to manage it carefully, and then at the end, measure to find out how close you came to the plan. Does the participant estimation have credibility because it's so subjective? That's a great question asked by Harold. Harold, I would ask you to just think for a minute about what the people in marketing or sales do in your organization. I will bet that they use customer surveys, and they use them all the time. And for some reason, using customer surveys by marketing is a brilliant thing to do, and they make lots of decisions involving millions, tens of millions, or hundreds of millions of dollars based on the results of those customer surveys. And yet, for some reason, in learning, we continue to question that. It's like it's okay for other people to use customer surveys. They're all subjective. But oh, we can't do that in learning. Of course we can, and we should. In fact, to not do that is disrespecting your employees, disrespecting the participants. They have a lot to say. So I would not shy away at all from using the participant estimation methodology. And I would definitely push back on anyone who wants to question us on that. Because I know in any organization, their salespeople or marketing people are going to be using customer surveys. Okay, great questions though. All
Anna
right, so
had a question too, Dave. I'm sorry. And I hope too much time hasn't gone by because Anna wanted you to repeat the name of the book you mentioned a bit ago. Do you recall?
yeah, the Jack and Patty Phillips I have a book, the Handbook of Evaluation and Measurement. That is the Bible for using the Phillips approach. It's a different approach than the Kirkpatrick's. Those two kind of split worldwide market share on measurement. So I'm talking about the isolated impact approach, level 4 isolated impact, and level 5 ROI. And you can learn all about that in their very basic book. It's a dense, thick book, but it's the Bible on how to do that now, and it's probably 5th edition. But they also have written 100 books, Jack and Patty Phillips. In all of their books, you'll read a little bit about this. They have some for sales, they have some for quality, they have some for leadership. They have titles covering probably anything you want to measure for. So you pick up either that handbook or you pick up one of their more current ones, and you'll find out about these methods. They're all proven methods. They've been used for 45 years. This is not experimental. So there we go, Handbook of Training Evaluation. And we're getting some other ideas in on the chat as well. So a lot out there to help you do it. They also offer workshops to help you. So you can get help. Okay, probably should move on just a little bit, then hopefully we'll have some time at the end to come back and pick up on some more questions in chat. So agreement on roles and responsibilities. I think this is really important, again, for this kind of goal-based or strategic learning. At Caterpillar, we actually came up with a contract because it was brand new. In fact, goal owners didn't even understand they had a responsibility for the learning until we talked this through with them and gave them a contract. I had 2 signed lines at the bottom. It was a contract. We both had to sign it. So here's what the L&D department will do on the left-hand side. You can read that. And on the right-hand side, it's what the goal owner will do. And we both have to do these things, or we're not going to succeed. We're not going to deliver a plan. And boy, some of them said, oh, I didn't know I had a role here. I thought my job was done when I called you people up and told you I needed training. I thought that was it. No, 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 no. Or I thought our job was done when the last course was delivered. No, no, no. You mean there's more work after that? Yes, there is. The hard work of reinforcing and getting application and turning that application into business results. It's hard. And things don't want to cooperate and problems always come up. It's hard. So yes, we have to do all that. We've got to commit to work together to do all of that. All right. So now that I've given you a more in-depth feel for what I mean by goal-based or strategic learning, you can see how different it is. So this is the strategic learning designed and executed to produce specific, measurable business results in a given fiscal year. It does require needs analysis. And the question you're going to be asking the goal owner to start the process is, what's it going to take to accomplish your goal for this year? Not to improve the skills of your employees. What is it going to take to accomplish your goal for this year? Versus a skills or role-based learning, which is just generically designed to increase skills, but without a focus on measurable results. Often there's not even a needs analysis done. And you may not even have a discussion with the goal owner, or they'll delegate it further down in the organization, often way down in their organization. Now the question is, what skills and capabilities are needed for success? And that's what starts you out on the role or skill-based approach. And I'm not saying that's wrong and shouldn't be done, but what I'm saying is it's different than if you want strategic learning. The upfront questions are different. What you come up with is different. How you execute it is different. What you expect from it is different. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the two approaches. Goal-based has to start with the CEO and then the goal owner. Skill-based starts lower in the chain of command. Goal-based is focused on the particular specific goals for the year from the organization, from the CEO. Skills-based focus on the job role. Goal-based has a time frame. I only care about what I can get done this fiscal year. No time frame for skills-based. They'll grow and grow through time, which is wonderful, but no time frame. Goal-based, we're going to get an agreement on specific programs, like specific courses. You'll probably get that or can get that in skill-based approach as well. Goal-based, agreement on planned impact for this fiscal year. Skill-based planned impact is not talked about. It's not part of the whole process. Agreement on targets for key measures, goal-based, no agreement on skill-based. Agreement on roles and responsibilities for goal-based, probably no agreement for skill-based. Reinforcement plan is a necessity for goal-based, probably no reinforcement plan for skill-based. Communication plan, a necessity for goal-based, probably no communication plan for skill-based. The execution is entirely different between the two. And the plan result for goal-based is that measurable impact on the goal, highly visible to the CEO. Planned impact for goal-based is increased skill level, which is wonderful, but doesn't have the same ring to it, the same pizzazz to it. Now, I am generalizing. Some of you may be saying, yeah, but Dave, we do skill-based, but some of the elements are maybe closer to what you're saying over here for goal-based. Okay, and that's good. But just in general, these are the differences. So my conclusion is that skill or role-based learning is not enough. It's not that it's bad. In fact, looking back, I wish we had done more of it. It wasn't a thing at the time. Like I said, competency was, and that was in those days really expensive, really complicated. There was no AI help, no good software available to do it. But if I were a CLO today, I would definitely love to have this for every role. I'd love for every employee to be able to know what they need to be proficient in their current job and their next job. That would be a great advance. So I would look forward to doing that to the extent I can, but it doesn't take the place of strategic learning. Strategic learning is a different animal altogether. Now, some of the courses you have that you've developed for these roles, you might be able to use coming out of the needs analysis done with the goal owner and their team. It may turn out you've already got some of that, or we're planning to get that. That would happen by chance, but it might happen, in which case there's kind of an overlap between the two approaches. And that's wonderful. But skills-based learning is more passive versus the proactive strategic learning approach. And I would say only by chance will skills-based learning help you achieve this year's goals. And it certainly isn't going to do it in a way the CEO gives you credit for it. And you may think it's silly for me to mention the world. Your senior leaders have got to know you're delivering for them. They want to see bottom line results. When I go and ask the CEO for budget and staff for the next year, they want to know exactly what they're going to get for that. And how much money they give me and how many recs they approve will depend directly on how much they believe I'm going to help them accomplish their goals. So I am going to do skills-based, but I'm kind of doing that in the background. I'll let them know I'm doing that, and I'll let them know maybe we're up to 80% of the roles identified and whatever, and I'll let them know that, and I'll talk in general about that, but I'm not going to lead with that. With my CEO and my quarterly Board of Governors meetings, I'm going to lead with the strategic learning because that's something they can see. They deal with it every day. So I'm going to lead with that and then follow with the skill-based. But I'm going to make the case for my budget primarily based on that strategic learning. So what I'm saying is you do need both. You need strategic learning if you're going to be viewed as a strategic business partner. Just doing the role-based isn't going to get you there. But strategic will. It's going to get you that high visibility exposure to the CEO. And you're going to be able to say, look, here is what we believe we contributed to your goals for this year. If you want more of that next year, then you got to continue to fund this. But like I said, the skills or role-based learning is great to provide employees with that individual direction. They should have learning journeys. That's fantastic. And it will increase the overall proficiency level of employees. And you might have some areas, especially now with something like AI, where you have a chance, because it's coming from such a low base, to actually show very impressive gains. That's why establishing a baseline is always so important. You might do a survey today and be able to show that today your employees have, on a scale of 5, about a 0.3 level of proficiency in AI. Wouldn't it be wonderful in a year or 2 years to say you've raised that from 0.3 to 2 or 3 or 4? That would get you some credit. That would be important. But in general, the skills-based has no direct impact. Obviously, you hope it has indirect impacts. If you can improve team building, if you can improve communication skills, shouldn't that help salespeople? Well, yeah, it should. But unless the needs analysis you did with the sales team indicated those are your issues, then don't try convincing anyone that team building and communication is leading to increased sales, because no one's going to believe you. And honestly, you'd never be able to show it. So don't even try. All right, so 3 steps you can take to implement strategic learning, and then we got some time for questions. So meet with the CEO and the goal owners before the new fiscal year starts. So don't wait for someone to ask you for help. You start with the CEO. Ask for a half hour on their calendar, several months before the end of the fiscal year. And you're going to have a business discussion with them. This is not a learning discussion. This is a business. And I say you, it might be your CLO. But the learning department needs to have that business discussion with the CEO. And they're going to see you, if they haven't seen you in this light before, of being very proactive. You're up front. You're the one setting the meeting up. You're the one asking to know what the goals are. And by then, they're not going to be published anywhere. The board of directors hasn't even approved them yet. So these are only in the CEO's mind. So that's why you have to go talk to them. And then go talk to the goal owners after you find out who they are. So you're getting a head start on it. And you'll be doing this at the very same time others are engaged in the business planning process in your organization. In too many companies I talk to, their role doesn't come until after the business plan is approved. They say we can't do anything until the business plan is approved. Business plan gets approved like in December, and then they're working in January and February to put together their learning plan to support the business plan. No, that's not right. You got to have your plan going on at the same time as your organization's business plan. You are part of that process. You're not a passive follower when it's over. So you want to be in there with them. You're putting your plan together at the same time they are. And without your help anyway, how do they know how much they can accomplish? How can they even finish their own business plan if they're not working with you? So, assuming the answer is yes, looks like learning has a role to play, then we got to do these things we're talking about. Then do your detailed needs analysis, design and develop the learning, do all that work, set yourself up for success, and then jointly manage it. That's where that execution comes in. This is where the hard work comes in. To come as close as you can to delivering against those plans. It was so important at Caterpillar that for my performance review, I reported to the head of HR. I started with these key programs, and I just copied off what our percent contribution was going to be and what the results were going to be, like a 2% higher sales due to learning based on a 60% contribution. And I said, here's what I'm committing to do. You can judge me on this. If we don't hit those, then you don't give me the high score, the high rating. So you can see why I was totally bought into this. And I had to know every month exactly where we were because I don't want to fail. I like getting A's in school. I like getting A's in the workplace. I want to deliver. But if it's the plan, I want to be viewed as a reliable business partner. So I was going to do everything possible to deliver those results. So they had my full attention. And they could see that. Okay, just two questions to wrap up. Now, with this understanding, so my definition, if you will, of strategic lining, let's see if it do this poll again. I'm just curious if the results changed. It's about an even split before between yes and no, with maybe a fourth not sure. Let's see if maybe some of you thought you were doing it or hoped you were doing it, but given my definition, you would now say no, probably not. Let's see if this changed, kind of a pre and post test, if you will. It looks like we have results coming up. See what happened? So some of you might have thought you're kind of doing it today, not doing this. So it's good you're doing something that has to do with goals, but maybe not this. So only 2 of the 19, 11%. So what that indicates to me then, moving on to the next one, is would you say that there's a place in your organization for this thing we've been talking about these last 45 minutes? Now, maybe there's some of you would say, well, not really. A military training command, for instance, this might not fit well in military training command. And I've worked with some of those. But most others, for-profits, nonprofits, governments, educational institutions, this focus on, and you wouldn't, it might not be called a CEO in your organization, but this focus on the goals of your top leader, I think is incredibly important. Well, let's see what you think. So most of you think there is. So no one said no, and some others just quite honestly, I always appreciate the honesty, not sure. But maybe it's something you give a try. Maybe it's something you talk about with others following this. And just see, you can share the presentation. You're going to have it in case he's making it available. So if you think about this, socialize it in your group. And if you were to do this, is there a program that comes to mind if you think about your organization's top goals your CEO has? Are there some of those goal owners you've worked with closely in the past you get along well with? It would be good partners to try this as a pilot, maybe, for the upcoming fiscal year to see how it works. Pilots are always safe ways to try something new and different. No one loses too much if it doesn't work. It was a pilot after all. Sounded like a good idea. But you might just see if it worked. I think they would appreciate this business-like approach. I think they would. That the feedback I get is now you're talking our language. And when I showed them some of these reports, they said, I understand that report. That's just like the reports I use. Well, yeah, it is because that's where I got it. So I just took these from the business. So yes, it's speaking their language. So give it a try, and you can make so much more of an impact. Not only can you make that impact, but you get credit for it. So you get the satisfaction of doing better for your company, but it doesn't hurt to get the respect from your CFO and CEO for them to be able to believe that their learning department knows what's important, knows the goals of the organization, has gone out of their way to strategically align their learning to those goals and work it closely with the goal owners. The other thing you're going to get from this approach is goal owners are going to stand up for you because you've worked as a partner. So if you do this right, let's say you're sitting around a table and you're reviewing the sales training. You said something like, and we believe that learning supported by both parties results in 2% higher sales. If anyone around that table questions you, the first person who's going to respond is the head of sales. So you don't have to do it. First person can be head of sales. And they're going to say, oh, stop right there. Dave worked with us closely from day one on this. We came up with a joint plan. We worked it all the way. We looked at the results every month. When it was done, we reviewed how best to come up with the actual results. And I believe this fully. That'll shut down any questions immediately. And it didn't have to come from you. It's better when it comes from the goal owner because they're your partner now. Okay, so, and Casey, I don't know, I wasn't able to pull up the Q&A. So I'm just seeing the chat.
Yeah, we're good on questions. I think we're in a good spot.
All right. So does anyone else have any question, any comment in the chat?
Omar did just throw one more in the chat. He said, if we believe the company has enough resources, would you still not recommend doing many of this type of programs, or do you see a risk in it?
Well, if you don't have resources, I mean, if you're resource constrained, then you have a lot of stakeholders out there, and you can't focus all of your effort in one area because you got to keep everybody happy in the real world. But I would certainly try to do at least one as a pilot. So, as a start, everything's a journey, and you never start at the end, you start at the beginning. So the beginning is doing this for one program in support of one goal. So I would start there. If you have enough resources, maybe two, uh, and then start there. But you have to be doing all those other things at the same time, your leadership, compliance, onboarding, basic skills training. You're going to use that role-based approach for the skills types of courses. So I'd want to make some progress there as well. I want to dedicate some money to that. So really what I'm saying is just don't put all of your resources in the role-based bucket. You need to save some out for strategic learning. Now, when we set up CAT-U, we were fortunate enough to have in our charter that strategic focus. We were created to help Caterpillar accomplish its business goals. And Caterpillar had 28 business units at the time, and all of them had their own learning department. So one of the things we had to do when CAT-U was established is figure out who's responsible for what. So the 28 departments were responsible for a lot of their tactical day-to-day type learning. So if we had a manufacturing plant in Grenoble, France, and they needed help with some manufacturing training, there wasn't any way I was going to help them do that in French. So let them do that on their own. We'll be responsible for global learning. They can be responsible for local learning. This would be an example at Caterpillar of global learning. So we supported manufacturing, sales, Six Sigma, leadership, business acumen, all those sorts of things. It's where engineering, it's where we focused our efforts in CAT-U. So we have the luxury of doing that. And about 80% of our resources were focused on those things, including leadership.
We got one more question that slid in from Ryan. Ryan says, appreciate all of this, Dave. Thank you. It's especially useful for you to distinguish between the results that learning can impact and those results learning cannot impact. How might you approach impacting results that your organization has little control over, like the impressions and goals of legislators and public opinion?
Well, that's a good point. So if one of your goals is to influence the state legislature to pass a bill or something, uh, learning is going to have a very probably indirect role in accomplishing that. You can apply the Phillips methodology to almost anything, and they would probably tell you they could apply it to anything and take it as a challenge. But practically speaking, you're right. If I were going to try this, certainly for a few programs, I try to choose those with more defined and regularly measured metrics like sales, like injuries, like productivity. Leadership can be easily measured in your employee survey. I try to find something with numbers if I were going to start down this path. And the other thing to remember is that this approach we're taking going all the way through to level 4 isolated outcome or impact is not meant for all programs. So don't think you're supposed to do this for every course. You're not. Even the Phillips will tell you, you'll probably only do isolated impact and ROI for maybe 20%, maybe less of your programs or courses. Like compliance training, you're not going to do it for it. Communication skills, no. Basic AI training, no. You're not going to push it through to AI and ROI. For most courses, you want to do those efficiently and effectively. So your effectiveness measures are going to run for levels 1, 2, and 3. You want to make sure that it's applied. You want good level 1 and make sure they learned it and that it's applied. You don't have a level 4 impact. You don't have ROI. So save the impact and the ROI for that handful of strategic learning programs.